I don't know that the government currently has fiscal anchors.
New parliamentary budget officer talking about the Mark Carney government being without any fiscal anchors. I'm David Krayden. Thank you for joining me on this Wednesday morning, September 17th. We'll be back shortly with some, I hope, matters of interest.
The Prime Minister lied and his minions continue to lie.
Your home is your castle. We're calling on the government to introduce and immediately pass the Stand on Guard law.
But we also need to resolve to resist.
Yes, please like the station, like the channel. We really appreciate you doing that. And subscribe. We need your subscriptions. We always say we're lagging behind where we should be. I can take the suppression. And I know your support is so important, and I appreciate it in any way possible. Lots to discuss today. And by the way, this is David Krayden broadcasting to you live. I sometimes forget to mention that, from Ottawa. And of course, Parliament's back. And so far, it's been a rocky ride for the Carney Liberals, because we understand the new parliamentary budget officer appeared before the Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates. And that's where we had that opening quotation, that opening comment about there's no anchor to this government. And we're not going to get a budget now till November. Let's watch the rest of that clip before we get into, and I've got to preface this by saying, this news about Chrystia Freeland being this special envoy to Ukraine for reconstruction is not just wishful thinking, it's insanity. And we'll get into that later. I know a lot of you are thinking, oh, we're free of Freeland. But here she goes. And some of you have already pointed out in your comments, she's going to go to Ukraine and potentially cash in on the billions of dollars that Canada, the United States, and other NATO allies have poured into Ukraine, and they have been absolutely pilfered by President Volodymyr Zelensky and his corrupt government. Billions of dollars. And we've got Doug McGregor clip on later to say very succinctly, how corrupt is Zelensky? Well, I think, let's just say Chrystia Freeland, whose grandfather was a Nazi propagandist in Poland during the Second World War, should feel very much at home in Ukraine. She's been working for Ukraine for the last 10 years, at least. Not Canada. She works for Ukraine. It's Ukraine first for Chrystia Freeland. And that's what it's going to be as soon as she lands in the country. Let's say it's going to be heels down with Chrystia Freeland there.
The government currently has fiscal anchors.
I guess I want to get right to some of the questions that we have based on the reports that have been released to date. Would you agree that with a clear definition of what counts as operating spending, it's impossible to evaluate whether the government is on track to meet its fiscal anchors?
I would say officially, we're within the office. I don't know that the government currently has fiscal anchors, which of course causes the people that I work with a considerable degree of concern at this point. As everyone knows, the government did have fiscal anchors. The previous Minister of Finance had the fiscal anchor of a ceiling of the annual deficit at 1% of GDP, along with the declining debt to GDP ratio. It's unclear where those stand. They haven't been reiterated by the current government, to the best of my knowledge. With respect to your point regarding the capital and the operating side, we haven't seen a clear definition of what would fall into capital and what would fall into operating. So at this point, it's impossible for us and for you as parliamentarians to assess the likelihood or probability of the government hitting any fiscal target.
Thank you very much. So do you have any idea of when the government will give a concrete definition of its spending criteria, what its fiscal anchors may be, so that you can do the very important work of monitoring the government spending plans?
The short answer is no. There's a longer answer I can give to you if you have more time, but the longer answer is we're waiting for budget 2025 at this point. So traditionally what happens is all is revealed in a 400 to 500 page document. And at that point, we will have a clear sense of precisely what the fiscal anchors are. And if the fiscal anchor continues to be balancing an operating budget, hopefully at that point, there will be a definition of what that operating budget actually means.
So this seems to be the buzzword now for the new session of Parliament, fiscal anchors, which of course is a completely foreign concept to Mark Carney because he's got two books. He's got the real budget and the operating budget. This is called cooking the books, where you have two sets of books. So you can pretend we're not really operating at this kind of a deficit level. The national debt's not rising incrementally or in vast stages. We're going to have two budgets so nobody kind of notices, And that of course is unclear if the federal government still has fiscal anchors, says the parliamentary budgetary officer, who's Mr. Jacques, who was just on there explaining that. Now, I want to show you how this has reverberated in the financial community, because it's quite something. Have a look at this letter from, this is shall we say, a group of energy producers, Canadian Natural, Build Canada Now. An open letter to the Prime Minister of Canada. That would be Mark Carney. So 6 months have passed since the first Build Canada Now letter was sent to you, and the leaders of Canada's other political parties outlining an action plan to unlock Canada's world-class oil and natural gas resources to strengthen Canada's economic sovereignty, resilience, and prosperity. After the election, we followed up with a second letter expressing our support for our shared vision of Canada becoming an energy superpower. ... Since then, we have seen progress, but it is insufficient to stimulate the investment and growth required to make this vision a reality. Third paragraph. However, Canada still lacks the clear, competitive, and durable fiscal and regulatory policies required to achieve the so-called grand bargain. Our call to action is urgent. 4 paragraphs. To reiterate, we believe, next paragraph, we believe that your government must focus on the following: significantly simplify regulations, shorten timelines for project approvals, commit to grow production, not limit it, fiscal framework that attracts investment, incent Indigenous investment opportunities. That sounds exactly what the Conservative platform is, actually. Here's who signed this: Brandon Anderson, President and CEO, North River Midstream Incorporated; Terry Anderson, President and Chief Executive Officer, ARC Resources Limited; Doug Bortall, President and CEO, In Play Oil Corporation. And the list goes on, and you can on and on and on. So there's a sense, I think, here, not only dissatisfaction with Mark Carney's tardiness and indolence at times, but a satisfaction with what Pierre Poilievre is proposing on the Conservative side. So I find this well worth noting, and which is the reason I did it. Now let's go through some of Chrystia Freeland's shining hours here. And, Chrystia Freeland is somebody we all love to dislike. I'm not going to say hate, because we shouldn't hate anybody, especially after what happened last week in Utah. We should not hate anybody, but it's not easy to like Chrystia Freeland. Not just because of her policies, but she's grating. She has the most annoying personality, with that teacher voice, that voice that suggests I'm the only one in the room who knows anything. Why am I surrounded by these simpletons? Yes, and there she is, There she is, surrounded by Ukrainian supporters, and that's what Chrystia Freeland's all about: bankrupting Canada and supporting Ukraine. She's been very clear about that. And by the way, Francois Philippe Champagne, our finance minister, says no budget till November 4th now. Do you suppose they might actually wait till December? It's happened before. That's what happened to Joe Clark's minority government in 1979. It fell because they had a pre-Christmas budget. John Crosbie, I remember this very well, the finance minister of the day, strode into the House of Commons wearing mucklucks because, of course, it was mid-December. Joe Clark introduces a budget, and it has I think it was a 17-cent surcharge on gas. Of course, when gas was still sold by the gallon, and 17 cents a gallon surcharge, and it was less than $1 a gallon at the time. So Joe Clark government was defeated over that budget. And what do you bet they stall until December here? Yes, isn't that touching? And of course we know that Mark Carney's the godfather of Chrystia Freeland's children, and it's just touching to see the two of them together, such political cronies. Oh, it's just lovely. And here's Mark Carney's statement saying that, oh, isn't she lucky? This is her dream job. As she takes the decision to step down from the ministry, I would like to thank Chrystia Freeland for her extraordinary service in the cabinet of Canada's federal government over the past decade. This is a little hard to read. Christia's versatility, raw intelligence, and principled leadership have served Canadians with a distinction through extraordinary challenges and changes. Her leadership has helped to secure historic trade negotiations to guide oh my goodness, I can't to guide the response to a global pandemic. Yeah. What did she do about that global pandemic? Oh, just a minute here, folks. I've got it here. What did she do about that global pandemic?
That accounts have been frozen, both personal and corporate, but you're not releasing the information. And the actual follow-up is, I'm just wondering whether the bank accounts will be targeted of individuals who donated to the Give, Send, Go and the GoFundMe campaigns. Are they considered designated people under the Emergencies Act, meaning that their credit cards could be cut and financial services are targeting them as well?
Okay, so the names of both individuals and entities, as well as crypto wallets, have been shared by the RCMP with financial institutions, and accounts have been frozen, and more accounts will be frozen. Crowdfunding platforms and payment service providers have started the registration process with FinTrack. In terms of the specifics on whose accounts are being frozen, you now have the regulations. The financial service providers have those regulations as well, and they, working with law enforcement, will be making the operational decisions.
Thank you, True North, for that clip, by the way, because I've used that several times during the Freedom Convoy. Of course, that's what she did. She froze the bank accounts not only of protesters, but people who supported them. Absolutely incredible. She froze the bank accounts of protesters and supporters just because she felt like it. And I remember her appearing at the Emergencies Act inquiry, which was about 2 years ago now, in November 2023. And she took the stand, and she was asked questions about, well, why did she invoke such incredible powers as part of the Emergencies Act? Why did she have the gall to freeze people's personal bank accounts and some business accounts too, by the way? She said because people in the United States were describing Canada like a third world banana republic. Maybe they meant we were acting like a third world banana republic because people like you and Justin Trudeau were in charge, taking basic human rights away, absolutely suppressing freedom of assembly, absolutely crushing free speech, absolutely decimating the Constitution. Maybe that's why people in the United States told you that Canada looked like a banana republic. Here's another proud moment in Chrystia Freeland's storied past.
But the system we have now has actually broken down, only we haven't quite recognized it. And so you need to create a new one. And this is the time to do it.
In the United States, how worried are you about the budget deficit and maybe about the possibility of inflation?
Well, certainly a decline in the value of the dollar is necessary in order to compensate for the fact that the U.S. economy will remain rather weak, will be a drag on the global economy. China will emerge as the motor replacing the U.S. consumer. And, of course, it's a smaller.
All right. Did you catch that? Now, this is Chrystia Freeland, 2009. She's a journalist interviewing George Soros. Of course, they have lots in common. And George Soros is predicting China is going to overtake the United States as the chief economic power in the world. Now, Chrystia Freeland's now working for a man, well, not much longer, but, well, I guess indirectly she will be, Mark Carney, who has spent a lot of his professional life ensuring that China does supersede the United States as the chief economic engine in the world. So it seems to be serendipitous here. Here's Chrystia Freeland talking to George Soros, I'm sure one of her heroes, who, of course, supplants left-wing organizations all over the world and is vital to putting leftists in control of district attorney positions throughout the United States, for instance. And here's Chrystia Freeland talking to George Soros as a journalist. And I've got more to add after this.
Motor, because the Chinese economy is much smaller. So the world economy will have less of a motor. So it will move forward slower than it has in the last 25 years. But China will be the engine driving it forward, and the U.S. will be actually a drag that's being pulled along through a gradual decline in the value of the dollar. So there would be a slow decline in the value of the dollar, a managed decline. And that would be the adjustment that it needs to be accomplished.
Interestingly enough, here we are in 2025, the U.S. dollar is being devalued. And of course, we had a guest on here, an Alberta banker. I've had him on twice to talk about the fact that Mark Carney wants to devalue the Canadian and the U.S. dollars for the benefit of his European friends. So George Soros, here he is, 16 years ago, predicting the U.S. dollar would be devalued and China would become the chief economic engine in the world. Where are we headed right now? And Chrystia Freeland, after this interview, she remarked that she was going places. Was she talking about going places? Because it wasn't far off. She became a member of Trudeau's cabinet and then became the finance minister. Is that what she meant? She was going places? Well, she's going places again. Yeah, Chrystia Freeland's going places again. And you just can't keep a woman like this down, can you? And here she is, Chrystia Freeland, a special international envoy for Ukraine, would be problematic to both Trump and Putin. This is Ivan Kachanbosky. Should have practiced that before I went on the air. And he is talking about Chrystia Freeland being a big problem when she arrives there. Chrystia Freeland has never brought, shall we say, peace and security wherever she goes. She brings the exact opposite. She brings strife and unrest. And as I say, don't celebrate too much. Don't applaud too loudly that Chrystia Freeland is going to Ukraine as a special envoy. And here's what I have to say about her being responsible for reconstruction. How arrogant is the Carney regime to think that Canada is going to play any role in the reconstruction of Ukraine? Of course, that's the plan, right? Carney wants to profit off of this because we know that huge corporations that Carney has ties to want to benefit from the reconstruction of Ukraine, just like they want to benefit from the reconstruction in Gaza. This is what wars are all about. And once again, if you don't know my background, I'm an ex Air Force officer. I'm not a pacifist. I believe we need a strong military. But I think we need that strong military to defend ourselves from foreign adversaries and invasion, not to send our troops overseas to foment wars and start conflicts that didn't need to be started. And this is the foreign policy now of Western powers, United States, Canada, and Europe included. And Donald Trump needs to stop it now instead of being on both sides of the fence. He needs to take a strong stand. No more foreign wars. No. And stop destroying countries so that crony capitalists with connections to the government, to the elites, can step in and make billions, potentially trillions of dollars rebuilding the country. And we know that this is exactly what Mark Carney has in mind for Ukraine. There's going to be big money to be made from reconstruction. But what if, just a minute, Mark Carney, what if Canada or NATO has nothing to say about that reconstruction because Russia has won the war? And that's fast. We'll get to that in a minute. But here's another shining moment from Chrystia Freeland's illustrious career in the House of Commons. And of course, nobody applauded louder and longer than Chrystia Freeland when a former Waffen-SS member was hailed not once, but twice, but three times in the parliamentary gallery for being a staunch fighter against Russia. Problem was he was fighting Russia when Russia was an ally of Canada, United States, and Great Britain during the Second World War. So he was fighting for the Nazi Germans. Whoops, that was a really embarrassing moment. Chrystia Freeland never wanted to talk about that one, did she?
We have here in the chamber today Ukrainian Canadian world veteran from the Second World War who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today, even at his age of 98. His name is Yaroslav Hunka. And I was going to say he's in the gallery, but I think you beat me to that. But I'm very proud to say that he is from North Bay and from my riding of Nipissing-Temiskaming. He's a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero, and we thank him for all his service. Thank you.
There they go again. And I blame all the parliamentarians for that, because anybody with any sense of history would have known if you were fighting the Russians in the Second World War, you were not on our side. You might say, well, Joe Stalin was a poor ally. We shouldn't have been allied with Joe Stalin. But the historical facts are we were. That's what the Second World War was all about. And we were supporting Soviet Russia throughout 1941 to 1945 after Germany invaded Russia on June 22nd, 1941 with Operation Barbarossa. We supported them with Lend-Lease. We supported them in every way possible. And we did not support Waffen-SS troops who were fighting the Russian soldiers, who were fighting the Red Army. They were considered the enemy. But nobody in Parliament, including the Chief of Defense Staff, who was sitting in the gallery, had the sense, had the historical know-how, had the basic knowledge to understand that something wrong here. Why are we standing up and applauding a guy who fought against the Russians? Maybe he was fighting for the Germans. And in fact, he was. And his Waffen-SS regiment, Galicia, was guilty of war crimes. Now, we don't know if Yaroslav Hunka was. We'll never know that. Like 98 years old then. He's 100 now, probably. If he's still with us, we'll never know that. And we'll never know about so many other Waffen-SS soldiers who came to Canada after the Second World War, and the government covered that up, and they still won't release those names. But a little late now, isn't it? Because I'm sure most of them are gone. But I blame all parliamentarians for that. But I blame Justin Trudeau most of all for inviting this man there and blaming the Speaker, Anthony Rota. He wore it all. He was the scapegoat. He was the fall guy. Of course, he was guilty as well. But this is how Liberals work. We'll pin it all on the Speaker, right? Anthony Rota. It's his fault. Justin Trudeau. Oh, and when he responded to that initially, he said it was Russian disinformation. Do you remember that? Yeah. That was Justin Trudeau's response. Now, what's really happening in Ukraine? Do you think Chrystia Freeland has a hope in hell of being part of any reconstruction team in Ukraine? I can tell you emphatically, no. Because if you're watching CBC, you probably think Ukraine is winning this war. And you probably think, well, they're losing fewer soldiers than the Russians. Let's listen to Douglas McGregor, Colonel retired Douglas McGregor, who's been on my show several times, and I'm going to have him back on again to talk about Ukraine. And he puts this all very, very eloquently and succinctly, how different the situation in Ukraine actually is compared to how the mainstream media, especially in Canada, reports it, and how idiots in the House of Commons on all sides seem to think Ukraine is going to be triumphant in this war, even though it is essentially so short on manpower that it's using teenagers and old men to fight Russia. Let's listen to Doug McGregor, because I have a lot of time and respect for this man.
You know, the Russians have been taking losses in single and double digits now for several months. The Ukrainians are losing thousands of people every week. This is just a slaughter. And I don't know why President Trump doesn't recognize that and simply state the facts. The facts are Ukrainians have lost this war. Now, he can continue to rely on General Kellogg for fictional numbers, which is what he appears to be doing. But even worse, he can conclude that Russia is losing, according to General Kellogg, because the Russians haven't marched into Kiev. The Russians haven't crossed in the Upper River yet. It's a rather bizarre logic. There's never been any understanding in the West of certain things. Number one, President Trump has never recognized Russia's legitimate security interests in eastern Ukraine. He doesn't seem to understand that once we staged the coup in 2014, the war in Ukraine against Russians began almost immediately. And that war continued to rage for years until finally the Russians said enough is enough and intervened in eastern Ukraine. If you can't agree on the truth of what is actually going on and what has happened, how can you reach an agreement? In other words, if you come into this discussion with two separate sets of facts, what are you going to get? And the answer is nowhere. So I don't see President Trump coming out with anything. The other thing is that we're not in a very strong position because, as you pointed out, Clayton and Natalie earlier, we have led this war against Russia. All you have to do is go back to Biden. And now President Trump sounds just like Biden. Biden said in March, We've got to break Russia. It's not enough to harm Russia. We have to break it, destroy its economy. You know, we've got to rubble the ruble, remember? And then ultimately we've got to get rid of Putin. Good Lord. What more do you want? When is Trump going to step forward and say, listen, I disavow all that nonsense. I'm not interested in doing any of that. If he really wants an end to the war, he has to distance himself from all of that nonsense. He hasn't done it. That's a huge problem, Clayton.
Yeah.
Great question here coming up from Natalie Morris, and thank you, Redacted, for doing the interview, and thank you for using that I'm using it this morning. As you know, I appear on Redacted about every week to talk about Canadian news, and it was because of Redacted I was able to get in touch with Doug McGregor, and I'm very thankful for that because I really admire this man. He's one of the few military analysts who understands history and the world and is prepared to tell the truth, not what the president or the prime minister wants to hear, the truth, the unvarnished truth, the unalloyed truth. And somehow Doug McGregor can do this, but we have four-star generals every day on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News who lie about the situation in Ukraine because that's what their governments want to hear. And I love Natalie Morris's question here because this allows Doug McGregor to absolutely put Zelensky in the clearest perspective possible.
You to see what Zelensky does. It reminds me of a formerly popular music artist that just tours county fairs, because all he does is go on his Twitter and say, I met with this world leader. They love us. They support us. I met with this world leader. We exchanged pleasantries. They love us. What the hell is he doing? He's not operating in reality. So the Ukrainians not only have no plan on the battlefield, they have no leadership. So anyone who wants to say they support Ukraine should absolutely support an end to this clown regime.
Well, the clown that you're talking about has an estimated $1.1 billion in various bank accounts that he has stolen from all of the aid and assistance that we and our European allies have provided.
More, and European allies and Canada included. Over $1 billion in his bank account, and he's got homes waiting for him. Where do you think he got that money? You think the salary of being president of Ukraine has somehow allowed Zelensky to amass more than $1 billion in his bank account? Or being a two-bit actor? Maybe, did that do it for him? No. He has deliberately taken funding that U.S., Canada, and NATO has given him over the past 3 to 4 years.
And I know he's prepared to retire to either his $15 million estate somewhere south of Naples, Florida, or his massive chateau and vineyard in Italy. And he's got a private plane that's fueled and ready to go at moment's notice. I mean, the man is a criminal. That's the only way to look at it. He makes any organized crime boss look like an amateur. And the man continues to run around high on cocaine or whatever else it is that he's using at any given point in time and make outrageous statements. I don't know why President Trump puts up with it. Doesn't make any sense. He ought to just dismiss this man out of hand. And again, one wonders who is in charge. Who is the president of the United States? It's not just look what's happening with regard to our unconditional support for anything that President Netanyahu wants. At the same time, this is the president of the United States. We're the principal player that has been pushing this terribly stupid and counterproductive war in Ukraine, and he can't stop it by simply saying, my friend Zelensky, you're out of a job. We no longer recognize you as legitimate. We're cutting you off. Get out. Why bother turning it into and say, well, you got to make a deal? What?
Couldn't put it better. So he's got an estate south of Naples, Florida. He's got a vineyard in Italy, yachts, and a private jet that's waiting to take him away to one of these places as soon as the Ukrainians are fed up with him. But more than that, the Ukrainians have been fed up with him for years. It's the Ukrainian oligarchs and the elite who control that corrupt country. When they decide Zelensky's gone, Zelensky will be running as fast as his legs can carry him to that jet because it's over. And when it's over in a criminal regime, it's over. This is organized crime. This is the mob. You don't have a lot of time. You got to get ready to run, and he's going to be ready to run. And he is ready to run because his time is running short. There's no question about that. Take a quick break to have a look at the story. I'll be back with some highlights from question period yesterday. Yes. And I wanted to mention this here. Don't forget Saturday, this coming Saturday, September 20th. It's the third annual Million People March for Children across Canada. If you're in Ottawa area, it's on Parliament Hill, 10 a.m. If you're in a province, it's at the provincial legislature. So be there. We'll be talking about this more as Saturday approaches. So I want to show you a bit of question period yesterday because I think it shows exactly where I think Pierre Poilievre's going with this. And let's listen to some moments.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister promised that he would spend less, yet his deficit spending is 100% more than even Justin Trudeau. And what is the real human consequence of that? Food price inflation is rising 70% faster than the Bank of Canada's target. And today, the CEO of the major food bank network in Toronto says that there has been a 400% increase in food bank use there. Does the Prime Minister understand that his empty promises lead to empty stomachs?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, it's reassuring to hear the Leader of the Opposition that listened to the Prime Minister during the summer. I'm glad to see that he retained that we're going to spend less so we can invest more, Mr. Speaker, and investing more in Canadians. Like, for example, reducing the taxes for 22 million Canadians, Mr. Speaker. Like making sure that people who want a first-time home, buy a first-time home, will pay less in GST, Mr. Speaker. Making sure that we eliminate the consumer carbon tax, Mr. Speaker.
So we went from one annoying finance minister with a grating voice to a second finance minister with perhaps an even more grating voice. It's not easy to listen to Mr. Champagne at the best of times, but here he is at his grating best. Anytime you hear a government talk about investments or investing in the economy, read that to say we're stealing your tax dollars and we're spending them for our own benefit, because it always comes back to the government in the end. And governments don't make investments. They spend your money. And they usually do it very unwisely. So don't be fooled by the word investment. All the years I spent in public affairs, in government, in the military, on Parliament Hill, I can tell you that's the weasel word we were always told to use. Call it an investment. Because people are dumb enough out there to think, oh, that sounds good. We're going to make some money off this investment. No, you're going to lose money. And it's called you're going to pay higher taxes, and you're never going to see dividends off this investment.
I think the leaders should celebrate that this government is there for families across Canada to build a stronger and more.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, he wants us to celebrate his failures, including failures that are leading to real human suffering. Let me quote the CEO of Daily Bread Food Bank, Neil Hetherington. So giving you some context, previously before the pandemic, we were at 600,000 for the year visits to the food bank. And so it took 38 years to get 1 million visits per year, and then only 1 year to get 2 million visits, another year to get 3 million. Now we are at 4 million visits. Food bank lineups are growing and growing at an accelerating rate under this Prime Minister. Does he realize the very real human consequences of his broken Liberal promises?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, I'm here to announce some good news. Last night, Canada and British Columbia approved the new Silesum LNG export terminal in northern British Columbia. It's with the Niska Nation. It will be the second largest private sector investment in the history of this country. The second largest in the history of this country. It will employ thousands of Canadians. We would love the Conservatives to help us build Canada.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the question was not about re-announcing a previously approved project. It was about the cost of food. And frankly, it is insulting. We have asked 10 questions about the cost of food in the last 2 days, and not a single Liberal minister will get up and answer it. Maybe that's because the inflation rate on food is 70% above the target. Maybe it's because there are now 4 times as many visits to Toronto food banks as there were 3.5 years ago. Maybe it's because they broke their promise to stabilize food prices. Maybe it's because the Prime Minister promised that he could be judged on the price of food. Speaking of which, what's the verdict?
And notice now, this is the third cabinet minister to stand up and not answer the question about food and food banks. And I think this guy who stands up next, Gregor Robertson, is the biggest loser in the pack.
The Honourable Minister of Housing and Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, well, I know we're all in this House concerned about the price of food, and we're also concerned about our farmers. The #1 cost of living in Canada is related to housing, Mr. Speaker, and as I mentioned yesterday, people are concerned about housing prices. This government is taking action to make housing more affordable. With Build Canada Homes, with tax cuts, with the first-time home buyers tax cuts, we're making a difference for people in their pocketbooks.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the question was about food prices.
Right, yeah.
And he stood up to announce that he's going to be feeding some of his friends who are going to populate this latest $13 billion bureaucracy, a bureaucracy that will build no homes and that will only reward Liberal insiders who, like him, have a record of actually doubling housing costs.
Right.
But back to food, the stuff that needs to go on people's dinner table. We have a record number of people at food banks after the Prime Minister promised to make food more affordable. Doesn't he realize that his promises have real costs for Canadians?
Okay, I'm going to end it there because you're not going to get an answer for this. And I know this is why I don't do live question period anymore every day, because people watch this and they want to pull their hair out. They just want to fall off their seats, either laughing or in pain and anxiety, because we never get any answers in question period. This is all theater. It's theatrics from both sides, but at least the Conservatives do ask some questions, but the Liberals will never answer those questions. And Gregor Robertson to stand up and talk about housing, it's amazing. This is the guy who utterly failed as mayor of Vancouver, who failed at any housing projects in his city, where the price of a house doubled while he was mayor of Vancouver. And yet, this is the man Mark Carney chose to be his housing minister. He chose so many incompetents to be ministers. Look at the public safety minister. Every week we learn about the potential security problem here. And why would he put a guy like that in charge of public safety? But why would he put Gregor Robertson in charge of housing when he's utterly failed at that? Because Mark Carney is his own cabinet. You know, there's an old joke about R.B. Bennett, the Conservative Prime Minister from 1930 to 1935, walking from the Chateau Laurier, where he lived. He was a bachelor. He lived at the Chateau Laurier in a hotel room while he was Prime Minister. He was walking from the Chateau Laurier up Wellington Street to Parliament Hill, and he was talking to himself along the way. And the joke is, somebody asked, why is the Prime Minister talking to himself? And the answer was, he's having a cabinet meeting. And that's exactly applicable to Mark. Mark Carney is his own cabinet. He will do whatever he wants, and it's all about making sure Mark Carney gets something out of this deal. And that's what kind of prime minister we have. Now, we get back to Chrystia Freeland. Nice to see she won't be occupying a seat in the House of Commons anymore. I don't know if the Liberals will retain that by-election seat. Probably. It's a safe seat. But don't think we're any better off putting her in Ukraine because she's heels on the ground in a country that's so corrupt, so awash with cash that we have sent there, along with the United States and Europe, that anything can happen when Chrystia Freeland gets there. And I can tell you this, it ain't going to be good. Thank you for watching today, folks. It's been a pleasure. This has been David Krayden, broadcasting to you live from our nation's capital. We'll be back again tomorrow. And heads up, look to the skies. God bless and Godspeed to all of you. Thank you for watching.